I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to my colleagues, to the testifiers, to the people of the territory. My first set of questions have to do along the lines of what was being discussed in regards to waste management being managed by a board and some of the issues that we had in regards to paying our WAPA bill. I didn't fully understand the response that was just given, because what was shared with us is that even though the legislature had appropriated funding to the Waste Management Authority for 2.5 years, they did not pay their WAPA bill at all. And the WAPA bill rose to the tune of, I believe, over $6 million that was owed at the time when this state of emergency was called. And while we just heard a reading from the chairwoman explaining how WAPA is set up and run by a board, do you two individuals plan on making sure in the management of the Waste Management Authority that things like this will not happen again? That I understand sometimes you have to shift around things, but completely ignoring a utility bill for 2.5 years is somewhat irresponsible and led to some serious situations. How do you, as potentially new members of the board, plan to manage situations like this?
You want to go first?
Sure. I think the word is accountability in terms of, we've obviously got an energy crisis which is ongoing, but from a funding standpoint, much of that has to do with agencies that are in arrears. And I think that if you have a board and you have a body, you have a duty to maintain accountability on all sides, including paying your bills. And if you have to come up with a funding source in order to pay your bills, or if you have to pivot and find a different means of doing that, you have to do that. But you have to pay your bills and you have to be accountable. So if I'm on this board or any other board, I pay my bills.
Linda Williams here. As I mentioned earlier in my testimony, as a charter of the authority, it's been my observations, I said, and mandate that our rules and regulations stipulate certain things. Emphasis being on use of public funds. Public funds are not readily available right now in the Virgin Islands at the authority. So what I am proposing, and as mentioned earlier, private-public partnerships with private entities or even with the federal government, the EPA, or whatever other agency that we can work with. So that would help give us a short gap measure to acquire, to get funding. That's going to require management, the governor, and potentially some senators going to meet with these agencies to say, hey, I have a shortfall, which I think already is happening, for funding for my major projects. Can I potentially get excused, and I know the governor has been working on that, to get those, to get those things put in arrears and move forward. That will allow us to get that funding to make those payments that are required. But until such time that we don't, find other revenues, it's going to be hard to pay some of these bills.
My next question I want to ask is, as a Virgin Islander who grew up here my entire life, I saw back in the day where we would have, I grew up seeing the garbage trucks moving around the community when it was underneath public works. And since that duty has been transferred over to waste management, we are now aware that a lot of that particular service has been sourced out to private entities. And over the years, we've had quite a bit of issues with payments, concerns where the trash haulers are not being paid on time, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that we are moving in the right direction where that aspect of waste management is sourced out? Or do you think it was more functionable how it was done previously under waste management, where the government owned the truck, had individuals being hired to go and pick up trash, etc.? Tell me your thoughts as to which direction you think we should be going, or do you think the direction we are in is the best one?
So, Linda Williams, to answer your question, ma'am, is basically I would have to make an assessment of currently where we at today. That assessment would be required knowing the revenue stream, how we potentially pay for these haulers, what we're collecting, and it's a lot of inputs that is going to be required for us to make a very conservative decision as to which way we should go. Me sitting here today and saying, yeah, let's go X or go Y is not, I think, informative for the public. I think we need to sit back and make that assessment in order to bring the staff in, and weigh heavily on the staff because they're actually the ones that are running this facility right now, and make a conservative effort to move forward.
Con Davis, in terms of trucking, hauling, I generally defer to the private handling of that, if properly managed and properly contracted. I think that the private sector is very capable of doing that in an efficient and cost-effective way. However, I think it's critical that we pay those vendors. As a small business owner and an entrepreneur, it's not being paid is something that keeps you up at night, takes years off of your life. You've got a payroll, and ultimately you're the last one to get paid. With our current tax regime, the first person to get paid, or the first entity to get paid, is 5% gross receipts before you end up dealing with your payroll and your equipment repairs and all these things. So I think it's somewhat catastrophic that all these small business owners have been forced into a situation where they have millions and millions and millions of dollars in debt. And if I look at it from a private sector angle, I can just understand how challenging that must be for them. In addition to that, the VI government's getting 5% gross receipts plus 20 to 30%, depending upon the tax back. So those vendors that money's not disappearing. It's going to local businesses that are providing a service, and 30 to 40% of that money is coming back to the VI government at the end of the day anyways. So I do think that the private vendors are very capable of trucking and hauling, but I also think it's very important that the contracts and all that is done efficiently, and also that they're paid properly, because if not, then the government is effectively paying them to finance it, because the bid is understanding that I'm not going to get paid within 30 or 60 days. I might be floating this for 2 or 3 years. So then the bid is going to be higher than it would have been had it been effectively paid.
I'm happy that you put that on the record, because I do believe that our vendors need to be paid in a timely manner. And unfortunately, our government at times do contribute to damaging the private sector. I want to spill over a little bit into the waste to energy conversation. As an employee of the legislature some 12 years back, there was a company called Alpine that wanted to come in and do a $200 million investment to do waste to energy. Madam Chair, may I wrap up?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. They wanted to do an investment of some $200 million. They would have worked with waste management, which would have turned over and paid to them some $20 million on an annual basis for some 30 to 50 years. There was a guarantee of some 400 to 500 tons of trash. I think it was daily or some usage like that. But the problem that was happening was the concern that we might not have been able to produce the amount of trash for that particular type of system at the time. And they were looking at building growing tantan bush and all sorts of other things. Ultimately, the deal derailed because there was some concern over number one, the $20 million annually for almost 30 to 50 years. Plus, the concern had to do with the ultimate ownership of the energy pellets at the end. Because if our government was putting in so much money as well as Alpine, who would have owned these energy pellets that would have been now sold to WAPA to help reduce our energy costs? And according to what was reported at that time, it was some $17 to $40 million potential profit that could have been made. Seeing that we've moved forward, we're 12 years ahead. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier about potentially other options from waste to energy, but do you think that we are seriously capable of producing the type of trash that a company like this would need, as well as being able to do waste to energy currently, maybe on a smaller scale in comparison to what some of the larger companies do nationally, et cetera, here in the territory?
I believe that we do. The volume of waste was about 550 metric tons a day back then in that contract. And if you looked at the tipping fee contract and the amount of variables in there, it makes LEAC look simple. And that would have been somewhere in the $150 per ton rate back then, which inflation adjusted today would probably put you more like 250. They were also looking to utilize pet coke from a shuttered refinery, which obviously wouldn't have been available not very long after, and is a heavily carcinogenic material. So there were a number of challenges, I think there. But yes, we would need to look at facilities that are utilizing smaller amounts of waste stream, and it would be part of the entire picture. There are examples of technologies. I heard India referenced, the company that I worked with in the past. India was where we set up our first facility, Germany, India, Japan. Quite often military and mining outposts have utilized smaller incineration and waste to energy facilities. There's plenty of examples of that. So yeah, I believe that prior to issuing another RFP, if that's the direction the authority would want to go, we should go on our own fact-finding mission prior to, so that whatever that integrated waste management plan looks like, as far as what the RFP looks like, it's something in line with what's available today. When I responded several years ago post-Alpine, the determination was that 95% of the waste had to be utilized. That's just not a realistic number. In San Francisco, where you've got 50 years of education surrounding recycling, and you've got economies of scale that exist in, the largest state in the country, they've only ever reached about 70% landfill diversion rate. So I think we also need to be very honest about how we issue these things and not throw out, pie in the sky bids which are impossible to comply with.
Linda Williams, I'm going to concur with Mr. Davis's assessment. Yes, we have to go back and relook at what we're doing. And I'm most certain there's a lot of offerers that in the past had submitted information, so we can glean that information if we have it available, and we can go forward and do great things. But we have to do some sort of intervention to help our people. And I totally agree with what you're saying, that we need to try to make this comprehensive plan and put it in place as soon as possible.
And to add to what Mr. Williams was saying, I mean, we know that whatever technology would be utilized as far as waste to energy, there's a non-negotiable, which is that you have to prepare that waste, and you have to separate that waste and get it prepared. So to the degree that we have federal funds or abilities that we can bolster our infrastructure through convenience centers, a tipping floor, and a material recovery facility, that would be creating a lot of value for ourselves as well as whatever entity, if it's a separate entity or otherwise, that would be doing any sort of waste reformation in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the additional time, and I look forward to the nominations being brought forward to the full body.
Thank you, Senator Francis Heiliger, for your...
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I still have to do my credit increase because I need to do that to legal counsel. Point of inquiry to the chair of the legal counsel. Before I get into my
Senator?
4 minutes.
So, if I may, Senator, so you will be granted your 4 minutes, and then I will grant you additional time if need be for your clarification through legal counsel.
Okay.
So you may proceed.
Well, Madam Chair, I need this part explained because it would help me with my questions
Okay,
later on.
proceed.
That's part of
Proceed.
the reason why I wanted a point of inquiry first.
Proceed.
One of the reasons in regards to this point of inquiry to the chair to legal counsel, this piece of legislation has gone before the court previously in a court case, Abis versus the Virgin Islands Legislature, 216F supplemental 2D45 District Virgin Islands Court 2002. And in the opinion and the memorandum that was shared by Judge Moore, there was a section that within the piece of legislation that speaks to this would not apply to employees for federal, receiving federal monies, etc. But when the judge made his ruling, he specifically stated something, and I need some clarity on it. You could do a search for it quickly. It's on Justia, but I want to read it just to get your understanding so I can better understand what we're dealing with. In his statement, what Judge Moore said, the only way that Section 2 of Act Number 6488 can stand is if it is construed to apply only to those agencies and departments of the Virgin Islands government only with locally derived money. I again agree with the government that Section 2 may be upheld by so limiting its application accordingly. I upheld the validity of Section 2 of Act Number 6488 as applying solely to employees of Virgin Islands governmental and quasi-governmental agencies that are not federally funded. And he also, just in his conclusion, just to close it up so you can clear this up for me. Judge Moore said in his conclusion, uphold Section 2 as consistent with the Hatch Act by construing it to apply only to employees of departments and agencies and entities of the government of the Virgin Islands, including independent and quasi-independent agencies that receive no money or only de minimis funding from the federal government. And the reason I'm asking you to explain that to me, because the bill speaks to the employee itself. But when this came before the court, the judge spoke specifically as to the agencies receiving federal money. And that's where I need some clarity. Because I recall one of the reasons as an employee working in the legislature, when this law was taken out initially back in 2001, and in the one legislature and replaced back in the following legislature, is because of what came out in this ruling. And they recognized that the majority of the government agencies were receiving federal funding. So could you, if you could find it, I don't know if I want to give you time to look for it while I go ahead with my 4 minutes. I don't mind doing that.
Through the chair to Senator Francis Heiliger, you would have to give me the name of the case again. I was listening to what you were saying to try to see what your question was. And then you're coming in a little foggy, so I didn't hear the name of the case.
I will repeat it for you. Abis, ABIFF,
Okay.
versus Abis versus Virgin Islands Legislature, 216F, supplemental 2D 455, DVI 2002.
Okay.
PI 2002.
GVI, is that GVI? Not GVI.
No, D as in dog, the District Court of the Virgin Islands, DVI.
DVI. Gotcha.
DVI. District Court of the Virgin Islands. Yeah, DVI, D as in DVI. Yeah, sure. 455.
And you want me to go ahead with my 4 minutes while she's researching that, Madam Chair?
Please, proceed.
Okay, no problem. When it comes to this piece of legislation, as an employee of the legislature that has worked here for over 20 years, this type of law is very close to me. I personally had to run for public office 5 times. And I will be honest with you, I initially was frustrated when I had to go on leave for 6 months. And I did this 4 times and during a special election. In doing so, I had to learn that anything you want to get accomplished, you're going to have to make sacrifices. And what I realized that as much as I might have huffed and puffed because I had to take the time off, I recognized that there were times that I probably could have gotten it accomplished during a lunch hour or on the weekend. But more often than not, I literally needed those 6 months of time to integrate myself and reach out to the community to really get them to understand why should you elect me to represent you. And this is not a small undertaking that could just willy-nilly be done in a short period of time. So I see it from both sides. I see where employees, if they have good time management, they could do it. But I also see it from the perspective that some serious time has to be put into running for public office if you're serious about being a representative of the people. And when I worked at the legislature years ago and this case ended up coming up, because initially it was when the legislature passed the law, that section of the law was vetoed by Governor Turnbull and they overrode it and it ultimately went to court. And some of what I just read was in the court case. One of the things I heard, one of the testifiers just said that it was rumored that it was done for a specific individual. And, you know, that rumor did permeate during that time. And that individual at the time, from what I recall, was the St. Thomas administrator. And the thing that with that administrator, they were allowed, because they had ultimately changed the law at that time, they actually did stay on the job during the primary. But it was interesting that right after the primary, and they subsequently won in the primary and ultimately won to become a senator. Even though the law was changed that it was open that all government employees could work and still run for public office, that particular administrator came out and still took a leave of absence. And what he said to the public, you know, to this day still resonated with me. And the specific words that he shared with the public was simple. He said, I think it is right and it's the right and ethical thing to do. It doesn't seem to me that you can actually campaign for office and work for the government at the same time. As a government employee, he added, you're being paid by taxpayers' money, and the least you can do is give them the full 8 hours. And this was done set by the St. Thomas administrator, even when he had the opportunity to stay full-time on the job. He still took a leave of absence because
Time.
from his perspective, oh, my time is up. Well, I just wanted to share a little bit of history. Once again, I see it from both sides, Madam Chair and testifiers, because I've lived it. But I want us to understand where we were when we did change this law and the reason why it initially got changed back. But from a historical standpoint. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Through the chair to Senator Francis Heiliger. Okay, so the case you're referring to, you had several plaintiffs. The main plaintiff was a beef who sued the legislature of the Virgin Islands, the Board of Elections, the Virgin Islands Attorney General, and the Commissioner of Public Safety. And basically that they sued them based on sections 1 and 2 of Title 18 of the Virgin Islands Code. The allegations had to do with them stating that it was unconstitutional under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution to prevent them from engaging in dialogue and electioneering on election day. Just to sum it up, so the judge did state in that case that the Section 1 was declared unconstitutional because it did interfere with the public's right to engage in dialogue with respect to governmental elections on election day. However, they did find that Section 2 was consistent with the Hatch Act. And what Section 2 states, and it's still in the code today, where it talks about the eligibility of government personnel for public office. And so here again, it states that, persons, they may seek public office, but of course, if they are in certain positions or if they're in positions that are federally funded, that they would have to take a leave of absence from work. The outcome was that the citizens, their motion for a declaratory judgment was granted as to the First Amendment argument. However, it was denied as to the Hatch Act argument.
Because the Hatch Act had already existed and the judge said he can't enforce something that already exists. But the question I asked you specifically, the bill speaks to speaking about employees. But this ruling from the judge that referenced the Hatch Act, he spoke to employees and governmental agencies that receive federal funding. And when one of my colleagues shared that we don't follow the Hatch Act here, also inside of this document, it says Congress explicitly extended the provisions of the Hatch Act to the territories and the possessions of the United States, C5 USC, subsection 15018. So when I did look that up, they did include in the definition of what a state is, that a state is considered state or local agency inclusive of territories and its possessions. So when the judge specifically says in this document from court, the judge is saying he's upholding Section 2 once it's consistent with the Hatch Act. And he specifically references dealing with agencies that get federal money. This bill speaks to the employee, but this ruling spoke to the agency collecting federal money. So I want to know, is it just limited to the employee itself, or like the Hatch Act speaks to not only the employee, it also speaks to local and some agencies that receive federal money?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
That's what I'm trying to get clarity on.
Well, it would have to be the employees. I mean, this case doesn't what I pulled up here doesn't really have the entire history of the case. However, with those agencies receiving federal funds, it would seem as if those federal funds went to funding an employee's salary. That employee may have certain restrictions when it comes to running for office without maybe resigning or taking a leave of absence.
Okay. And I'm going to close off here because I'm not getting the clarity I need, because you keep stipulating employee like in the law, but this document kept saying employee and government agencies. There are federal monies that go towards government agencies for programs that not necessarily fund an employee. So what was stated here said, it stated both of them. It said anyone that's an employee as well as local entities that receive federal money. So that's where I am trying to understand, would this blanket everything, or it will just singularly, because I don't want to do anything that the court has already deemed us we should or should not do. And I recall when this ruling came out, and after they had analyzed it, that was the reason why they put the law back how it was before and closed it back off. Because it was determined that way too many government agencies were receiving federal funds in some shape or form, not only to pay employees. So that's where I was trying to get some clarity.
Point
But
of
thank you,
information.
Madam Chair, for this one.
Point of information.
Point of information, Senator.
Thank you so much. I just want to put on the record, because I don't want the impression that only the wealthy should run or people that are affluent. And I often, again, use myself as an example. When I made the decision to run for public office to serve the public, I recognized some of the things I needed to do to get this accomplished. One of the things people did not recognize with me, for 8 years, I didn't take a vacation. During that 8-year period, every single time from the day I lost the first election and I showed up to work the next day, I did not take vacation because I wanted to save up my annual leave, because I knew that would cover at least 3 months of my bills during that campaign cycle. And then I saved up for the other 3 months, and that is how I was able to do it. I made sacrifices. I didn't buy any cars. I didn't do anything. I didn't give myself anything extra for 8 years because I knew what I needed to do in order to help serve the public. That was my personal sacrifice. So I don't want the impression to go out that only people with money have these type of abilities, because there's some of us that went above and beyond to make sure that we did these things in order to get here. Now, like I said, for me, it's neither here nor there, because I have seen it from both sides. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the time.
Thank you, Senator Alma Francis Heiliger.